Nobody in Table Rock ever forgot the spring break weekend of 2010. Even years later, people still remembered exactly where they had been when the news began spreading across the community. It started as a few worried phone calls between parents. Then it became dozens. Before noon, it became the only thing anyone in town could talk about. 6 young men had vanished. Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes had grown up within a few miles of one another near Table Rock Lake in Missouri. They attended the same schools, shared many of the same friends, and spent much of their free time in the same places that generations of local teenagers had known before them. On the evening of March 19th, they joined a spring break gathering near a lakeside trail area that was popular among students. More than 30 people attended at different times throughout the night. Nothing about the gathering seemed unusual. Friends later described a normal evening. Photos taken during the event showed familiar faces, casual conversations, and the excitement that often came with a short break from school responsibilities. Throughout the evening, the 6 friends remained part of the larger crowd. Witnesses consistently remembered seeing them together around 10 o'clock. Others recalled seeing them periodically throughout the next few hours. Their movements appeared ordinary. Their plans appeared ordinary. Nothing suggested that the night would become one of the most mysterious events in Missouri's recent history. The final confirmed sighting at the party occurred shortly after 1 in the morning. Several attendees remembered the group leaving the gathering and heading toward a trail that connected the area to nearby roads around the lake. Some believed all 6 left together. Others remembered the group separating into smaller clusters while moving away from the party. Investigators would later spend years comparing those statements, searching for details that might explain what happened next. No explanation ever emerged. At 1:48 a.m., a security camera at a roadside convenience store captured 3 of the 6 young men passing through the area. The footage was brief. It showed only a small fragment of the night. Yet it quickly became the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Those images confirmed that at least half of the group had reached the location. After that moment, the trail disappeared completely. No additional cameras recorded them. No businesses reported seeing them. No one contacted family members. No one returned home. By sunrise, concern began replacing confusion. Parents expected the teenagers to be sleeping late after the gathering. As the morning continued, unanswered calls became impossible to ignore. Families contacted friends. Friends contacted classmates. Vehicles were checked. Familiar hangouts were searched. Nothing. As the hours passed, fear spread through every family connected to the group. The 6 young men came from different households, but the same question echoed through all of them. Where were they? Shortly after 9 that morning, official missing person reports were filed. Local authorities immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. 1 missing teenager was alarming. 6 disappearing during the same night was something entirely different. Investigators began gathering information as quickly as possible. They documented timelines, reviewed attendance lists from the gathering, verified family statements, and attempted to reconstruct every known movement from the previous evening. The deeper they looked, the more troubling the situation became. All 6 had followed normal routines before attending the party. None had packed belongings. None had discussed leaving town. None appeared to be planning a long trip. Their phones had been active earlier that evening. By morning, every device had gone silent. The sudden loss of contact from all 6 individuals transformed the case into an emergency investigation. Authorities worked to identify everyone who had attended the gathering. The list eventually exceeded 30 names. Dozens of interviews followed. Certain details remained consistent. Most witnesses agreed that the group left sometime between 1 o'clock and 1:15 in the morning. Several remembered seeing them moving toward the lake area. Others remembered seeing smaller clusters of the group at different moments before they disappeared from view. No witness reported any argument. No witness reported any emergency. No witness reported anything that clearly explained why 6 young men would vanish within a matter of hours. Investigators also examined transportation records. One vehicle belonging to Mason Reed was located near the gathering site exactly where friends expected it to be. The truck remained untouched. That discovery eliminated one possible explanation. The group had not simply driven away together. As detectives continued reconstructing events, attention shifted toward the gap between the party and the convenience store camera. More than 30 minutes remained completely unexplained. No witnesses, no footage, no verified movements. That missing section of time became the center of the investigation. Every effort focused on answering a single question. What happened between the moment the 6 friends left the party and the moment 3 of them appeared on camera? By the end of March 20th, the question remained unanswered. Families gathered together waiting for updates that never came. Search teams prepared for a massive operation around Table Rock Lake. Investigators organized witness statements into detailed timelines. Every possible lead was examined. Yet despite the urgency, despite the resources being deployed, and despite the growing attention across Missouri, the case was already becoming something far more frightening than a simple missing person report. 6 young men had entered the night together. By the following evening, they had vanished so completely that nobody could explain where they had gone. And the mystery was only beginning. The investigation expanded rapidly during the days that followed, but every new effort seemed to create more questions than answers. By the afternoon of March 20th, authorities had already assembled one of the largest missing person searches Nicholas County had seen in years. State agencies joined local investigators. Volunteers began organizing independently. Families who had spent the morning hoping for a simple explanation were now facing a reality that became more frightening with every passing hour. The timeline remained painfully short. Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes had attended a spring break gathering on March 19th. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing them during the evening. Several people remembered the group leaving shortly after 1 in the morning. A convenience store camera captured 3 of them at 1:48 a.m. After that, nothing. No verified sightings existed anywhere else. No financial activity appeared on any account connected to the 6 young men. No phone signals emerged after the early hours of March 20th. No one contacted family members. Investigators focused first on the area surrounding Table Rock Lake. Because the 6 friends had been seen heading toward routes connected to the lake, authorities believed their next movements were likely concentrated there. Search teams divided the area into sectors and began checking locations commonly visited by local teenagers. Particular attention was given to 2 places near the shoreline. One was a marina used by local boat owners. The other was a small public launch area frequently used during warmer months. Both locations sat within a reasonable distance from the route investigators believed the group may have followed after leaving the convenience store. The first significant discovery appeared during those early searches. Personnel reviewing marina records noticed an inconsistency involving a privately owned motorboat. According to the owner, the vessel had not been used that night. According to marina records, no departure had been authorized. Yet the boat was no longer where it was supposed to be. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an administrative mistake. That explanation disappeared quickly. The owner confirmed he had not taken the boat out. No family member had permission to use it. No employee reported moving it. The disappearance of the boat immediately attracted attention because it occurred during the same time window in which the 6 young men vanished. Hours later, investigators uncovered another unusual detail. At the public launch area, a pedal boat normally stored near the shoreline was also missing. Again, nobody had permission to remove it. Again, nobody could explain when it had disappeared. For investigators, the coincidence was impossible to ignore. 2 different vessels had gone missing during the same night. 6 young men had disappeared during the same night. Both events occurred within the same general area. Suddenly, the possibility that everything was connected became difficult to dismiss. The physical evidence added even more concern. At the launch area, investigators documented marks that appeared consistent with equipment being moved toward the water. Additional impressions suggested that something substantial had passed through the location during the early morning hours. None of the evidence directly identified the 6 missing friends. However, the timing aligned with their unexplained disappearance. As the search continued, witness reports began arriving from residents living near the lake. One report described an unusual engine sound sometime after 2 in the morning. The witness could not identify the source, but believed it originated from the water rather than from a nearby road. Another witness remembered hearing a loud voice during roughly the same period. The report was vague and lacked enough detail for identification, yet investigators documented it because it occurred within the same critical time frame. A third witness reported seeing a brief light moving across the water around 2 o'clock. The sighting lasted only a few moments before disappearing. On its own, each report seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern. Every statement pointed toward activity occurring somewhere on the lake between the moment the teenagers disappeared from camera footage and the hours before sunrise. By March 21st, investigators began evaluating several possible explanations. The first theory involved an accident. The missing boats, reports from witnesses, and the lake's size made that possibility difficult to ignore. If the young men had gained access to vessels without permission, a serious emergency could have occurred far from public view. Yet there was a problem. Search teams could not find the boats. Authorities deployed sonar equipment across areas considered most likely to contain submerged objects. Multiple scans were conducted. Numerous anomalies appeared on sonar screens. Each one generated hope. Each one produced disappointment. Natural formations, underwater debris, and irregular terrain accounted for every promising signal. Neither missing vessel was located. No personal belongings were recovered. No evidence directly connected the 6 friends to any point on the lake. The absence of physical proof created a second possibility. Investigators began considering whether another person might have become involved that night. The missing boats suggested planning rather than randomness. The witness reports suggested activity continuing long after the group disappeared from public view. At the same time, there was no direct evidence of violence. No confirmed signs of confrontation existed. No reliable witness reported seeing the young men with strangers. The theory remained possible but unproven. A third possibility involved voluntary disappearance. That explanation quickly weakened under scrutiny. The 6 young men had left behind vehicles, personal belongings, jobs, future plans, and families. None appeared prepared to vanish. No evidence suggested advance coordination. Most importantly, 6 separate families reported complete silence beginning the same night. Investigators found that difficult to believe. As March continued, search efforts expanded into nearby wooded areas. Volunteers joined professionals. Specialized teams examined trails, remote properties, and locations identified through local tips. Nothing produced results. Each day ended with the same conclusion. No sign of Ryan. No sign of Noah. No sign of Tyler. No sign of Mason. No sign of Dylan. No sign of Connor. The community that had expected answers within hours now faced a growing possibility that the mystery would last much longer. And while nobody knew it yet, the first phase of the investigation was already approaching a dead end. The 6 young men had vanished. The missing boats had vanished. Every lead seemed to disappear in the same darkness. The case was becoming larger, stranger, and far more complicated than anyone had imagined during those first desperate hours after the phone calls began. By the beginning of April, the case had already become a permanent fixture in local news across Missouri. The disappearance of 6 young men during a single night was no longer viewed as an isolated missing person incident. Investigators had spent weeks pursuing every immediate lead they could find, yet the central mystery remained untouched. Where had Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes gone after leaving the convenience store? The answer seemed hidden somewhere around Table Rock Lake. Everything investigators discovered continued pointing back there. The missing motorboat remained unaccounted for. The missing pedal boat remained unaccounted for. The witness reports all centered on activity near the water. The physical evidence collected near the public launch area suggested movement toward the lake during the critical hours after the 6 friends disappeared. As a result, authorities intensified their efforts around the shoreline and underwater search zones. Specialized sonar teams were brought in to examine portions of the lake that local search crews could not effectively cover. The operation quickly became one of the most expensive phases of the investigation. Detectives hoped the technology would provide what weeks of searching had failed to uncover. If the missing vessels had sunk, sonar should locate them. If any significant object rested beneath the water, sonar should identify it. For several days, investigators reviewed scan after scan. Dozens of anomalies appeared. Each one generated immediate attention. Each one triggered additional verification. None produced the breakthrough everyone was hoping for. Natural formations explained many readings. Discarded equipment explained others. Old debris from previous decades accounted for several more. The lake continued refusing to reveal any connection to the missing friends. The failure of the sonar operation created a serious problem for investigators. The accident theory had initially appeared to be the strongest possibility. The missing boats, witness reports, and lack of evidence elsewhere all supported that conclusion. Yet the longer the search continued, the more difficult it became to explain why absolutely nothing connected to the 6 young men had been found. No clothing, no personal belongings, no electronic devices, no identifiable evidence. Nothing. Investigators began discussing another possibility more openly. Perhaps the 6 friends had never spent significant time on the lake at all. Perhaps the missing boats were connected to a completely separate event. That idea seemed unlikely given the timing, but the absence of proof forced detectives to keep every option available. Attention shifted back to witness interviews. More than 70 individuals were eventually questioned during the first months of the investigation. Many had attended the spring break gathering. Others lived near routes believed to be connected to the disappearance. Most information repeated facts already known. Occasionally, however, new details emerged. Several witnesses remembered seeing unfamiliar activity around the launch area during the weeks leading up to March 19th. The reports were inconsistent. Descriptions varied. No names could be confirmed. Still, investigators documented every statement. One detail appeared repeatedly. Certain individuals seemed unusually interested in areas around the lake that received little normal traffic. At the time, nobody considered those observations important. After the disappearances, detectives reviewed them more carefully. Unfortunately, the information remained too vague to identify anyone. The investigation continued moving forward without a clear suspect. By summer, another challenge emerged. Public attention began changing. The first weeks after the disappearance had generated enormous concern. News coverage was constant. Volunteers arrived daily. Tips flowed into law enforcement offices. As months passed without answers, that momentum gradually faded. Families noticed the change immediately. They continued searching. They continued organizing awareness campaigns. They continued sharing photographs and information. But the number of leads decreased dramatically. Most new tips ended the same way. Someone believed they had seen one of the missing men. Investigators checked the report. The lead collapsed. Someone claimed to know where the group had gone. Detectives investigated. The information proved false. The pattern repeated again and again. Despite the frustration, authorities refused to close the case. Detectives remained convinced that something significant had occurred during the hours after the 6 friends left the party. The challenge was proving what that event had been. Toward the end of the year, analysts completed another review of evidence collected near the launch area. Among the documented findings were unusual marks in the ground, traces of material that appeared connected to recreational equipment, and indications that at least one object had been moved from land toward the water. The evidence was intriguing. Unfortunately, it remained incomplete. Nothing directly linked those findings to Ryan, Noah, Tyler, Mason, Dylan, or Connor. Without a direct connection, prosecutors could not pursue criminal charges against anyone. The case remained trapped between competing theories. Some investigators still favored an accident. Others believed outside involvement was becoming more likely. Neither side possessed enough evidence to convince the other. By the end of 2010, the official file had grown to thousands of pages. Maps, interview transcripts, search records, photographs, forensic reports, sonar data. Every document represented another attempt to understand what had happened during one unexplained night. Yet the most important answer remained missing. The 6 young men were still gone. Their families entered a second year without closure. Birthdays passed. Holidays passed. Graduations that should have included 6 familiar names came and went. Life moved forward for everyone else, but for the families, time seemed permanently tied to March 19th. Then, during an evidence review conducted in 2012, a discovery emerged from a source investigators thought they had already exhausted. The convenience store camera. The footage had been examined countless times since the beginning of the case. Analysts believed there was nothing left to find. Yet advances in digital enhancement revealed something that had never been clearly visible before. The figure, faint, blurry, positioned behind the 3 young men captured on camera. The image raised immediate questions. Who was the person? Why had nobody noticed earlier? And most importantly, had that individual followed the 6 friends after they disappeared from public view? For the first time in nearly 2 years, investigators felt they might be standing at the beginning of an entirely new direction. The mystery surrounding the 6 missing young men had just become even more complicated. The discovery in the surveillance footage generated a surge of optimism that the investigation had not experienced in years. For the families, the enhanced image represented something they had desperately needed. A new direction. For investigators, it represented something equally important. A reason to believe the case had not reached a dead end. The figure visible behind Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, and Tyler Brooks appeared only briefly in the convenience store footage. Even after enhancement, the image remained indistinct. No facial features could be identified. No clothing logos could be analyzed. No vehicle could be connected to the person. Yet the timing mattered. The individual appeared in exactly the place investigators cared about most. The narrow window between the party and the disappearance. During the following months, detectives reviewed hundreds of interviews collected during the original investigation. They compared old statements with the enhanced footage, hoping someone might remember a detail that had once seemed insignificant. The effort produced very little. No witness could confidently identify the figure. No one remembered an unfamiliar person matching the limited information available. No new suspects emerged. Despite the excitement surrounding the discovery, the investigation gradually returned to the same frustrating reality. The image raised questions. It did not provide answers. As 2013 began, the case officially entered what many investigators referred to as the long phase. The intense search operations had already ended. Large-scale volunteer efforts had become rare. Media coverage appeared less frequently. The 6 missing young men were no longer a daily headline. For their families, however, nothing had changed. Ryan's parents continued attending every public meeting connected to the case. Noah's family maintained a website dedicated to collecting information. Tyler's relatives distributed updated photographs showing what he might look like as the years passed. Mason's family worked with community organizations focused on missing persons. Dylan's parents contacted investigative agencies throughout the Midwest. Connor's relatives participated in awareness campaigns whenever possible. Each family pursued a different path. All of them shared the same goal. They refused to let the case disappear. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining evidence collected during the original search. Advances in forensic technology had begun transforming criminal investigations across the United States. Detectives hoped that older evidence might reveal information that had been impossible to detect in 2010. Several items recovered near the public launch area were submitted for additional testing. Fragments of material believed to have originated from recreational equipment were analyzed again. Partial impressions collected during the original search received renewed attention. Fibers recovered from nearby locations underwent more detailed examination. The results remained disappointing. Nothing directly connected any piece of evidence to the missing six. Nothing identified the individual visible in the surveillance footage. Nothing explained the missing boats. The mystery remained intact. By 2014, investigators expanded their review beyond physical evidence. Digital records from the original case received renewed scrutiny. Phone data, financial records, vehicle registrations, property records, employment histories. Every possible connection was re-examined. Analysts searched for hidden relationships that might have gone unnoticed years earlier. Again, no breakthrough arrived. The six young men appeared to have vanished from normal life during the early hours of March 20, 2010. After that point, the record simply stopped. No confirmed activity appeared under their names. No verified sightings emerged. No credible evidence suggested where they had gone. The silence itself became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Investigators often remarked that even individuals attempting to disappear voluntarily usually left traces somewhere. A financial transaction, a government record, a communication, a witness, something. In this case, 6 separate people had seemingly disappeared without producing any of those indicators. The absence of evidence made the case feel increasingly unnatural. Throughout 2015 and 2016, additional reviews continued. State investigators occasionally revisited the lake-related evidence. The missing motorboat remained a significant point of interest. The missing pedal boat remained equally puzzling. Detectives still believed those disappearances were connected to the case. The challenge was proving how. Search records from 2010 were re-examined repeatedly. Analysts reviewed sonar data collected during the original operations. Computer software allowed investigators to process information more effectively than before. Even so, nothing definitive emerged. Several anomalies appeared interesting. None produced enough evidence to justify a major new search. The years continued passing. In many cases, time weakens investigations. Witness memories fade. Evidence deteriorates. Public interest disappears. This case followed the same pattern. Yet one factor prevented it from being forgotten entirely. The families. Their persistence kept pressure on agencies to continue reviewing the file. Every anniversary generated renewed attention. Every public appeal produced new tips. Most tips proved worthless. Some consumed weeks of investigative effort. None solved the mystery. By 2017, the case had accumulated thousands more pages of reports. The file had become enormous. Yet the central facts remained unchanged from the first week. 6 young men disappeared. 2 boats disappeared. An unidentified figure appeared in surveillance footage. No one knew what happened next. In 2018, another extensive review took place as part of a statewide cold case initiative. Investigators compared the disappearance to similar cases across multiple states. They searched for patterns involving groups of missing young adults. They examined reports connected to organized criminal activity. They reviewed information from federal databases. The effort generated several possible leads. After investigation, every lead collapsed. The frustration within the investigative team became increasingly obvious. Many detectives believed an important piece of information existed somewhere. Something had been missed. Something connected the surveillance footage, the missing boats, and the unexplained activity near the lake. But despite years of effort, nobody could identify what that missing piece was. Toward the end of 2018, the official assessment of the case changed in a way that deeply worried the families. The investigation was no longer classified as an active priority inquiry. Instead, it was transferred into a cold case review category. That decision did not mean the case was closed. It did not mean the search for answers had ended. But it acknowledged a painful reality. After nearly a decade of investigation, authorities still possessed no evidence capable of explaining what happened to Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes. The mystery remained unsolved. And as the case entered the next stage of its existence, few people realized that the technology capable of changing everything had not yet arrived. When Michael Turner transferred into a cold case unit in late 2018, the Table Rock file followed him in a way no official transfer form could fully explain. The case did not belong to his new office in any ordinary sense. It remained a Missouri investigation, tied to the original county records, original witness statements, and original evidence collected near the lake. But Turner had been the investigator who noticed the faint figure in the convenience store footage years earlier, and that discovery had never left the case alone. To him, the file was not just unsolved. It was unfinished. By then, the disappearance of Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes had been frozen in public memory for nearly 9 years. The families still spoke their names. Community members still remembered the first searches. Local reporters still brought up the case whenever cold cases were mentioned. But inside law enforcement, the investigation had become a massive archive of unanswered questions. Turner's new unit had access to tools the original detectives had never possessed in 2010. Image enhancement software had improved. Digital reconstruction programs had become more accurate. Old photographs could be processed in ways that revealed surface details previously lost in blur, poor lighting, and outdated camera quality. To most people, those improvements sounded technical. To Turner, they meant one thing: the past could be examined again. He began with the evidence that had always bothered him most: the public launch area near Table Rock Lake. Original reports had described drag marks, shallow abrasions, tire impressions, and signs that a vessel may have been moved toward the water during the same period the 6 young men disappeared. At the time, those findings were important but inconclusive. The photographs were not clear enough. The measurements were incomplete. The evidence suggested activity, but it did not prove who caused it or why. Turner reopened the old scene photographs one by one. The first results were discouraging. Many images remained too low in quality to provide anything useful. Some were distorted by distance. Others had poor contrast. Several showed surfaces so crowded with ordinary where that separating relevant marks from background activity seemed nearly impossible. But the process did not end there. When newer software adjusted contrast and separated shadow patterns, the drag marks at the launch area became clearer than they had appeared in the original reports. 2 marks stood out. They ran in the same direction. They aligned with the path from the storage area toward the water. Their spacing suggested something wider and heavier than an ordinary object had been moved through that location. The conclusion was not definitive, but it was stronger than anything investigators had written in 2010. The missing pedal boat could no longer be treated as a loose coincidence. The old photographs now supported the idea that it had likely been moved deliberately. Turner then compared those marks to the tire impressions documented nearby. In the original report, the impressions had been described as incomplete and overlapping. After enhancement, a partial route became more visible. It suggested that an object had been transported from the storage area toward the launch point before entering the water. The pattern did not solve the case, but it narrowed the possibilities. If the pedal boat had been moved deliberately, then someone had taken time to remove it, guide it toward the water, and use the darkness of the early morning to avoid attention. That did not feel like a random accident. Turner returned to the missing motorboat next. The original marina records remained unchanged. The owner had not used it. No staff member had authorized its removal. No official departure had been recorded. The boat had disappeared during the same window as the 6 friends. For years, investigators had struggled to explain why 2 vessels from separate areas would disappear on the same night. Now, with the enhanced launch evidence, the question became sharper. What kind of event required both a motorboat and a pedal boat? The accident theory had always depended on the assumption that the young men themselves may have taken the vessels. But the more Turner examined the evidence, the less satisfying that explanation became. 6 young men leaving a party might make a reckless decision. They might trespass. They might take a boat without thinking through the danger. But the coordinated movement of two different vessels from two different locations suggested more than an impulsive choice. It suggested someone else knew the area, knew the equipment, and understood how to move through the lake access points without drawing attention. Turner did not write that as a conclusion. He wrote it as a question. That distinction mattered. Cold case work did not reward certainty without evidence. It rewarded patience, discipline, and the willingness to let one small fact lead to the next. By 2020, Turner had assembled a revised evidence map using the old witness reports, the enhanced photographs, and the original convenience store footage. The map did not reveal where the 6 men had gone, but it changed the shape of the investigation. The lake was still important. The boats were still important. The unidentified figure was now more important than ever. The next phase came when newer analytical programs allowed investigators to compare movement patterns across separate pieces of evidence. The faint figure in the surveillance video could not be identified, but the timing could be studied with greater precision. The enhanced footage showed that the person appeared close enough in sequence to the 3 young men to matter, yet distant enough to suggest separation. That detail revived an old fear. Someone may have been following them. From 2020 through 2022, Turner and a small group of analysts reviewed the file again under that possibility. They examined individuals known to have lived around the lake. They reviewed old reports about unauthorized activity near boat ramps. They looked for property owners, seasonal workers, former contractors, and people whose names had appeared only once in early interviews. Most names led nowhere. One name, however, began appearing in places that felt difficult to ignore. Raymond Cole, a reclusive former maintenance contractor who had worked around lake properties before 2010, had been mentioned briefly in early community interviews. At the time, he had not been treated as important. He had no known connection to the 6 young men. No direct witness placed him with them that night. But old records showed he knew the marina layout. He had performed small repair jobs near the public launch. He lived outside the main tourist areas and had access to private land beyond ordinary search zones. None of that made him guilty. But for the first time, the investigation had a person whose background connected naturally to the places that mattered. Turner added Cole to a renewed review list. By early 2023, the cold case team had reached a critical point. The enhanced images, revised movement map, and old witness reports still did not provide enough for an arrest or search warrant. They needed something new. A statement, a document, a physical lead. Anything that could move the case beyond theory. For 13 years, the families had been told to wait for new information. By then, many people had stopped believing any would ever come. Then, in the spring of 2023, someone finally contacted investigators with information that had never been included in the original file. The case that had been silent for more than a decade was about to reopen. The call that reached investigators in the spring of 2023 did not immediately appear capable of changing a 13-year-old case. The caller was Daniel Mercer, a 43-year-old mechanic who had lived near Table Rock Lake for most of his life. His name had never appeared in the original investigation. He had never attended the spring break gathering where Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes were last seen. He had never claimed to know any of the 6 young men personally. For years, Daniel had remained silent, not because he knew exactly what happened, but because he feared he might know enough to put himself in danger. His statement centered on a memory from the early morning hours of March 20, 2010. At the time, he had been driving home after finishing work. Near one of the secondary access roads connected to Table Rock Lake, he noticed unusual activity involving individuals he recognized from the area. One of those individuals was Raymond Cole. The name immediately caught Michael Turner's attention. For months, Turner had been reviewing old records connected to the case. Raymond Cole had appeared several times in property maintenance documents, marina work records, and local contractor files. None of those connections had been enough to make him a suspect. However, Daniel's statement placed him near the investigation's most important locations during the critical time period. Daniel also revealed something else. Several weeks after the disappearance, He overheard a conversation involving Raymond and another man. He could not hear every word, but he clearly remembered references to keeping people quiet and moving them somewhere nobody would look. At the time, Daniel convinced himself he had misunderstood. When the missing person case became national news, fear stopped him from coming forward. Years passed. The fear remained. But as he grew older, the guilt became stronger. Investigators carefully reviewed every detail of Daniel's account. Unlike many tips received over the years, his timeline matched known evidence. His description of locations matched places already connected to the missing boats. Most importantly, several facts he provided had never been released publicly. That gave the statement credibility. Turner immediately ordered a new review of every record connected to Raymond Cole. Property ownership records produced the first breakthrough. In 2010, Raymond had occasionally worked on a large rural property owned through a family trust. The property sat outside the original search grid established after the disappearances. Because investigators had focused heavily on the lake, nearby woods, and known abandoned structures, this location had received little attention. At first glance, the property appeared ordinary, but utility records told a different story. Electricity consumption remained unusually consistent for years. Water usage also continued despite periods when the property was supposedly vacant. The pattern suggested regular occupancy, not occasional visits, not seasonal use, regular occupancy. The findings alarmed investigators. The next step involved modern technology unavailable in 2010. Using updated aerial mapping software, analysts compared satellite images taken across multiple years. They discovered subtle but important changes. A storage building had been expanded. An older service structure had been modified. Access routes had been altered without corresponding permit records. None of these changes proved criminal activity, but together they justified deeper scrutiny. Turner requested assistance from federal authorities. The FBI joined the investigation. Cold case analysts, forensic specialists, and property crime investigators began working together for the first time since the disappearances. Their goal was simple: determine whether the property could somehow be connected to the missing six. Financial investigators also began examining Raymond Cole's historical records. They discovered a pattern of cash transactions that had never attracted attention during the original investigation. While none of the payments were individually suspicious, the combined activity suggested undeclared income sources extending back several years before the disappearances. The findings raised a troubling possibility. Raymond might have been involved in criminal activity that existed completely outside the original investigation. That theory gained strength when investigators interviewed several former associates. Most claimed they knew nothing. A few admitted that Raymond had occasionally used remote properties for purposes he never explained. One witness remembered being instructed not to enter certain buildings. Another recalled unusual deliveries during late-night hours. None of the witnesses possessed enough information to explain the disappearances, but their accounts strengthened the case for obtaining search warrants. By early summer, investigators had assembled enough evidence to move forward. Daniel Mercer's statement, the utility records, the property modifications, the financial activity, the witness interviews, the historical connection to Raymond Cole. Individually, each piece was incomplete. Together, they created a compelling picture. For the first time since 2010, investigators believed they were looking in the right place. The families were informed only that significant progress had been made. Authorities intentionally withheld details. Too many false leads had raised hopes before. This time they wanted evidence before promises. Search warrants were approved shortly afterward. Multiple agencies coordinated the operation. The planning phase took weeks. Every structure on the property was mapped. Every access point was documented. Every possible risk was evaluated. No one knew exactly what they would find. Some investigators believed they were searching for evidence of an old crime. Others feared they might discover proof that the 6 young men had died years earlier. A few dared to consider another possibility. What if the case had never been about a fatal accident at all? What if Ryan, Noah, Tyler, Mason, Dylan, and Connor had survived that night? The question sounded almost impossible after 13 years. Yet, as investigators prepared to execute the warrants, that possibility no longer felt completely unrealistic. The evidence was leading somewhere. The pieces that had remained disconnected for more than a decade were finally beginning to fit together. And for the first time since the spring of 2010, Michael Turner believed the investigation was approaching the truth rather than chasing it. The search warrants were executed in July 2023. For the first time in 13 years, investigators were no longer studying old reports, reviewing faded photographs, or analyzing historical evidence. They were standing inside locations connected directly to their primary suspect. Every structure on the property was examined. Every storage area was documented. Every utility connection was traced. The operation involved local authorities, state investigators, FBI personnel, forensic specialists, and cold case detectives who had spent years trying to understand what happened to Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes. The first day produced several discoveries. None of them solved the case, but each discovery increased suspicion. Investigators found records showing that portions of the property had remained occupied during years when Raymond Cole claimed the buildings were unused. Utility consumption confirmed the pattern. Maintenance purchases matched that pattern. Supply deliveries matched that pattern. Someone had been living there. The question was who? Additional searches uncovered old documents connected to false identities, expired identification cards, handwritten schedules, and records of purchases that did not match the number of people officially associated with the property. Individually, the items meant little. Together, they suggested long-term concealment. The investigation widened. Authorities searched 2 additional properties linked to former associates of Raymond Cole. Those locations had appeared during interviews conducted after the warrants were issued. Several witnesses, confronted with the growing evidence, became more cooperative than they had been for years. One former associate finally admitted something investigators had suspected for a long time. The disappearance had never been an accident. According to his statement, Ryan, Noah, Tyler, Mason, Dylan, and Connor had unknowingly witnessed a criminal operation near the lake during the early morning hours of March 20, 2010. Raymond Cole and several associates feared exposure. Panic led to decisions that were originally intended to be temporary. Temporary became permanent. The 6 young men were moved away from the lake area within hours of their disappearance. The witness provided locations, names, dates, details that investigators were able to verify independently. For the first time, the case had a coherent explanation supported by evidence. What happened next shocked even veteran detectives. The witness revealed that the 6 young men had not been kept together continuously. During the early years, they were separated between multiple properties connected to people loyal to Raymond Cole. The arrangement reduced the risk of escape and made discovery less likely. Investigators immediately began checking every location identified in the statement. Some properties no longer existed. Some had changed ownership. Some remained active. At one rural property outside the original search zone, authorities discovered recent evidence of occupancy by individuals who did not officially exist in local records. The discovery triggered emergency follow-up operations. Federal authorities joined local teams. Search warrants expanded. Resources increased. The investigation moved faster than at any time since 2010. Then came the breakthrough everyone had spent 13 years hoping for. A fingerprint recovered during one operation matched historical records belonging to Ryan Parker. The result was checked repeatedly. The match remained the same. Ryan Parker was alive. The information was kept confidential while investigators continued working. Hours later, another identification followed. Then another, and another. Each confirmation brought investigators closer to a truth that had once seemed impossible. Ryan Parker was alive. Noah Bennett was alive. Tyler Brooks was alive. Mason Reed was alive. Dylan Foster was alive. Connor Hayes was alive. All 6 had survived. The discovery transformed the investigation overnight. What had begun as a missing person case now became one of the most extraordinary recovery operations in recent American criminal history. Authorities worked carefully. Medical professionals, victim advocates, counselors, and federal specialists became involved immediately. The focus shifted from simply locating the missing men to ensuring their safety and beginning the process of rebuilding lives interrupted 13 years earlier. Families were contacted privately. Investigators refused to release information publicly until every identification was complete. The notifications were delivered one family at a time. For 13 years, parents had lived with uncertainty. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, every unanswered question. Now, for the first time since March 2010, certainty had arrived. Their sons were alive. The news spread through investigative circles before reaching the public. Many officers who had worked the original case struggled to believe it. Several retired detectives returned to assist the investigation after learning what had been discovered. Michael Turner remained focused on the evidence. Finding the 6 men was only part of the mission. The second part involved proving exactly who was responsible. Fortunately, the evidence was growing rapidly. The witness statements matched property records. The property records matched utility records. The utility records matched financial records. The financial records matched materials recovered during the searches. For the first time, every major piece of the puzzle supported the same conclusion. Raymond Cole stood at the center of the conspiracy. Additional associates began negotiating cooperation agreements with prosecutors. Some hoped for reduced sentences. Others feared the growing evidence. Several provided information that strengthened the case even further. By August 2023, investigators believed they had reconstructed most of the events that began after the 6 friends left the spring break gathering 13 years earlier. The mystery that had haunted Missouri for more than a decade was finally collapsing. The families had their answers. The victims had been found. The evidence was overwhelming. And for the first time since the night 6 young men disappeared near Table Rock Lake, justice no longer felt like a distant possibility. It felt inevitable. The public announcement was made in September 2023. For more than 13 years, the disappearance of Ryan Parker, Noah Bennett, Tyler Brooks, Mason Reed, Dylan Foster, and Connor Hayes had remained one of Missouri's most painful mysteries. Families had searched. Investigators had searched. Volunteers had searched. Entire communities had refused to forget. Now, at last, the truth was no longer hidden. The 6 young men were alive. News stations across the country carried the story within hours. Reporters who had followed the case since 2010 returned to cover what many were already calling one of the most remarkable resolutions in modern missing person investigations. For the families, however, the story was never about headlines. It was about a phone call they had dreamed of receiving for 13 years. One by one, investigators contacted each family before any public announcement was made. No parent had ever stopped hoping completely. Yet after 13 years, hope had become difficult to hold. Birthdays had passed. Graduations had come and gone. Friends had married. Families had grown older. Life had continued moving forward while questions remained frozen in time. Now those questions finally had answers. The months that followed focused on recovery rather than publicity. Medical professionals, counselors, victim advocates, and family support specialists worked closely with the 6 men. Investigators understood that surviving 13 years of isolation did not mean life could immediately return to normal. Everything had changed. Technology had changed. Communities had changed. Families had changed. The world they remembered from 2010 no longer existed exactly as they had left it. The adjustment required patience. It required support. Most importantly, it required time. Throughout the fall of 2023, prosecutors continued building their case against Raymond Cole and several associates. Unlike many older investigations, this case now possessed something it had lacked for years: evidence, witness testimony, property records, financial records, utility records, recovered documents. statements from cooperating associates. Every major piece supported the same conclusion. The disappearance had been intentional. The years that followed had been carefully concealed. In November 2023, Raymond Cole stood trial. The courtroom remained filled throughout the proceedings. Family members attended. Investigators attended. Community members attended. Many had waited more than a decade to hear the truth presented publicly. The trial lasted several weeks. Jurors reviewed years of evidence. Witnesses described how the conspiracy began. Experts reconstructed timelines. Former associates testified regarding their involvement and the efforts used to hide the crime. When the proceedings ended, the verdict was unanimous. Raymond Cole was found guilty on multiple counts, including kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, criminal conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Several associates received substantial prison sentences as well. For the families, the verdict brought relief. Not because it erased the past. Nothing could return 13 lost years. Nothing could restore every missed opportunity. Nothing could undo the pain. But accountability mattered. Truth mattered. Justice mattered. For the first time since March 2010, all three finally existed together. As the legal process concluded, attention shifted toward the future. Ryan Parker enrolled in an adult education program and completed studies that had been interrupted years earlier. Noah Bennett pursued technical certification and eventually built a successful career. Tyler Brooks began working with organizations that supported missing person investigations. Mason Reed participated in community outreach programs focused on families affected by long-term disappearances. Dylan Foster became involved in nonprofit efforts that helped victims rebuild their lives after trauma. Connor Hayes frequently spoke with law enforcement training programs about the importance of persistence in cold case investigations. None of them sought fame. Most preferred private lives. Yet their story continued reaching people across the country. Universities studied the investigation. Law enforcement agencies used portions of the case during training. Missing person organizations highlighted the importance of never abandoning unresolved cases simply because time had passed. Michael Turner was often asked how the case had finally been solved. His answer rarely changed. No single person solved it. The families kept searching. Volunteers kept caring. Investigators kept reviewing evidence. Witnesses eventually found the courage to speak. Each step alone was not enough. Together, they changed everything. Years later, the story remained unforgettable not because 6 young men disappeared. Not because the mystery lasted 13 years. Not because a criminal was convicted. People remembered the case because it challenged a belief many quietly accept. The belief that once enough time passes, hope becomes unreasonable. For 13 years, the evidence seemed gone. The leads seemed exhausted. The answers seemed impossible. Yet the truth still existed. It existed when nobody could see it. It existed when the case became cold. It existed when people began assuming the story would never have an ending. And because a handful of people refused to stop looking, that truth was finally found. The case became a reminder that hope is not measured by odds, calendars, or statistics. Hope survives through people who continue searching when others stop, who continue caring when others move on, and who continue believing that answers matter even after years of silence. Sometimes life does not reward persistence immediately. Sometimes justice arrives late. Sometimes the road back seems impossibly long. But as long as someone is still willing to seek the truth, the story is not over. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that people are found. It is that, despite everything they have endured, they are given a chance to begin again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story from beginning to end. Your support, attention, and willingness to share this journey mean more than you may realize. Stories like this are not only about mystery, loss, or the search for answers. They are about the strength of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the importance of never giving up on the people we love. One of the most important lessons from this story is that even when circumstances seem impossible, persistence can make a difference. The families never stopped believing. the investigators never stopped searching. The truth remained hidden for many years, yet it was eventually uncovered because ordinary people refused to surrender to hopelessness. In our daily lives, we all face challenges that may seem too difficult to overcome. There are moments when giving up appears easier than moving forward. But this story reminds us that patience, courage, faith, and determination can carry us through even the darkest chapters of life. We sincerely hope this story has inspired you, touched your heart, or given you something meaningful to reflect upon. If you enjoyed this story and would like to support our channel, the simplest way to help is by leaving a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing more meaningful stories to viewers around the world. Thank you again for being here, for listening, and for being part of our growing community. We truly appreciate your support, and we look forward to sharing another unforgettable story with you very soon.